Starting to record. Okay. Hello, everybody.
How you doing?
Better now. Much better now. Jim got things straightened out for me here, so I shouldn't have any trouble. Next one's not going to be till after Christmas anyway. So, Jim, I should have enough time to figure this out by then.
It's all good, man.
Yeah. Hopefully that'll work. But thanks for hanging in there, everybody. Okay. Welcome to the final one for this year. Let me get this thing straightened out here. Here we go. All right, today's agenda. Any comments from the last meeting, or we have any DMS issues? A little bit more talking about preventive maintenance and what we're looking for in that process. I've added a couple things here. Jim and I discussed some things earlier yesterday regarding the testing of the privileges for both private pilots and commercial pilots, and some sources we have to find the some good scenarios and so on, stuff like that. To talk a little more about circling approaches, I've had some phone calls from individuals, both instructors and examiners, asking what exactly a couple of the NODs that showed up in the retesting. Examiner was curious as to what actually happened on some of these. So I'm going to cover some of that stuff. Our point of contact reports, and then we're going to talk about the FAA's version of the stabilized approach. So any comments from the last meeting? None? Okay. Any DMS issues?
Help if I unmute. Yes, the DMS autofill appears to not be working. Has anyone been able to make that work in the last 2 or 3 days? Or to autofill the IACRA information to DMS? And we are getting some background noise.
Everybody check your background noise, please.
I think you got it.
I just did it yesterday. I just filled out a few pre-approvals and I didn't have any issues.
Yeah, it's after you finish the check ride though, and you try to autofill.
Oh yeah, I thought maybe that was because it was a paper one. And so I did have that problem on the post activity, but
I'm like you, Jim. I've had post activity. I can't make it autofill for my act.
I did the usual, cleared the cache. I did not try a different browser, but yeah, I think it's been down for a few days. So hopefully that doesn't last long. I feel like a caveman having to type things in one letter at a time.
Yeah, and then also if you're doing a retest, when it gets to the oral portion, if you put 0, it won't let you do that.
Guess you got to talk to him for at least a few minutes.
What was that last part?
Just you can't put 0 for the oral time, even on a retake flight only.
If you have to fill it in by hand.
Got it. Okay, let me get a lot of these messages cleared up here, these chats. Okay. All right. Any other issues with DMS? Oh, okay. The DPE WG document is still available for us to look at. There hasn't been much activity on it, but they've asked, as I mentioned the last meeting, they've asked for us as a group to kind of look at that and see if there's any additions or any information, comments that we have regarding that document. So somebody needs the address for that, let me know. Okay. Has anybody been having any issues since we started talking about a little different process for the maintenance logs for the check rides? Has it been working out so far? Has there been any issues that we need to chat about? Nope. Okay. Whoops, there we go. There we go. There I am. Okay. All right, preventive maintenance. We discussed this the last couple meetings. Just want to make sure that the applicants are aware of where that is found. It's not necessary to know all the items that need to be covered, but where do they find it and how would they write up a component, and also what verbiage would they use and where would they write it up at? So that's kind of the things that we want to have the schools cover before we get into it with them on the check ride. Okay, just checking the chat there for. Okay. Jim and I had a discussion, and actually I had a discussion with Todd up in Prescott, Todd Underwood, and these two things kind of fell over each other is on the testing, on the testing of the private pilot privileges in regard to what can and can't you do, what determines pro rata versus compensation and so on and things like that. And there is an advisory circular 61-142, and I'll have a couple little things that I'll pull out of that. But what's happening is the frustration, I guess it is, it's coming from our group and as well as our customers, the instructors and the schools, is the various scenarios that are given to the students or to the applicants. We've got to remember, this is private pilot 101.
Which one is it?
Sometimes we're giving scenarios that require an awful lot of in-depth knowledge. In some cases might even involve an attorney to translate whether or not this person can do what they are asked to do. So we want to make sure that our scenarios are based on a fairly realistic scenario, not to be too subjective. And if an applicant says, I can't do that, there's been some situations where the examiner thought that that may have been an incorrect answer when that private pilot could have actually done that particular flight. But I think when the applicant is, answering on this side of caution, said, well, I don't think I can do that. I'd have to get pretty deep into the regs. And like I said, in some cases, some of the stuff has quite a bit of legalese in it. So there's also a lot of interpretations from the FAA on this kind of stuff. But taking a look at AC 61-142, you actually find some scenarios in there that are fairly cut and dry. And Jim, why don't you talk about the one that you had mentioned to me yesterday?
So I put the link in the notes. Off the top of my head, just paraphrasing one that the FAA gives, and this actually caught my attention because this is different than I remember being taught, close to 30 years ago. Back then, we just focused on, not holding out, not running a business, and, as a private pilot, paying, at least the pro rata share, and that was kind of the end of the story. So the thing that caught my attention is this idea of having a common purpose for doing the flight, meaning the pilot chooses the destination and has a reason to go there. It doesn't have to be the same reason as the passengers, but the pilot needs to have their own reason to go there for a private pilot to take passengers to that location. So the example that I mentioned to you, Phil, was guys in some kind of a triathlon or some kind of race or something, and he's got 6 or 7 friends that are all traveling to go to this race together, but he's got a 4-seat airplane. So as a private pilot, he takes the first load of people there, drops them off, flies back home, picks up the rest of them, takes them to the race. And the FAA very clearly says that the first lay or trip, the first group of people, it's totally legitimate for a private pilot to do that because he's in the race. He has a reason to go to that destination. But for him to leave the race, go back, pick up the other people and take them to the race, that is not appropriate for a private pilot. Now he's providing transportation like an airline. So, and the FAA doesn't seem to care whether any money is exchanged or not. They've defined hours in our logbook, and goodwill and other things count as compensation. So it's really not just about the pro rata. It's not about the exchange of money. It also includes the common purpose. So that's outlined in, I think it's section 9 of this advisory circular.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, like I said, what we're trying to get at here is to come up with some sort of a normal or best practices type of situation where the questions that we're putting forth to the applicants are not such that they'd have to actually investigate so many sources other than the standard regs that they have access to. The regs themselves are pretty skinny on what a private pilot can do. Can't fly for compensation or higher. Well, as we see right there, they can do charity flights under certain conditions with a certain amount of flight time, glider towing and aircraft sales. So these are other types of flying where they would be not going somewhere on their own, but actually, of course, they're not getting paid for these things. This is still incidental to flying the aircraft. It's not part of their business. And then along those lines is obviously they can't be compensated for this stuff, but there is a type of compensation for things like charity flights and so on and so forth. So what we're getting, I'm going to do the commercial here in a minute. So what we're trying to encourage is a little more, being a little bit more in line with the schools and what the examiners are testing that for. And just keeping in mind that this is basically private pilot 101 level that these ladies and gentlemen are just getting into. And you know, if they say, I wouldn't do that, or I don't think I can do that, even if they possibly could, I think that answer should be suffice, that there's not enough information available to them to make that determination without asking their instructor or asking the FAA, the FSDO, about their interpretation of that. So I actually think those are much better answers when they don't know. Any questions on the private pilot one? Okay, commercial pilot privileges. Once again, let's keep the scenarios realistic. Obviously, this is a higher level of certificate. Now they can start getting paid. There was an issue with a check ride where the applicant was asked if they could fly someone's airplane for them, their own personal airplane, and they had stated that they could. I don't know the complete story. That's Todd Underwood had all the information on that, but basically the answer was yes, I can. And the thought process from the examiner involved was that basically you can't do anything, you know, that's not 121 and 135, which we know is not the case. But once again, in the he said, she said thing, we're not sure exactly what was said, but we want to make sure that once again, that this is, everybody's on the same page, what they can and can't do, and have some sources to look at for this. So some of those sources are part 119.1. And in that, I got a couple of things here. I know this is going to be a couple busy slides, but this is pretty much what that says, is that part 119.1 does not apply to these things right here: student instruction, the nonstop commercial flights, farrier training flights. They can be paid for that. Aerial work operations, including crop dusting, seeding, spraying, and bird chasing. And I'm aware that if anybody is going to be doing crop dusting, there's another certification associated with that. Banner towing, aerial photography or survey, and things like pipeline, power patrol, things like that. So once again, this is pretty much what we've used to kind of get an idea of how they can answer that question. And once again, if something's not on here and they're asked a unique off the wall question, there may be other sources that they would need to go to, and this probably wouldn't be something they would necessarily have committed to memory. Does anyone have any comments on that portion of the check ride? Okay. Going to talk about some circling approaches. Once again, there's some various evaluations or outcomes of the evaluations regarding circling approaches among the group. You know, both our locals and our out of district individuals. I want to cover a couple things here. Does anyone expect the expanded circling minimums to be memorized, or can the applicant look that up when they're asked that question?
If it's applicable to the equipment they're testing, and I would expect that to be recall knowledge. If it's something that doesn't directly apply to them, I would say that's one they can go look for directed reference.
Okay. All right. Anyone else?
You talk about the 1.3 nautical miles for depending on
Yes.
categories.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I would think that would be. I mean, an applicant can look up anything if they're consistently looking everything up after every question. in my opinion, I think that that's a lack of knowledge, you know?
So Phil,
Okay.
you're talking about the expanded table?
Yes,
Because I think it's appropriate for them to memorize their circling minimums, the standard circling minimums, if you want to call it that. But the expanded, that table that changes with altitude, I wouldn't expect them to memorize that.
yeah,
They can-
I should have said that's what I'm referring to because it has variations in it, and that's an awful lot.
Yeah.
Awful lot to memorize. You're gonna be hard pressed to find very many approaches anymore that have the standard ones anyway. The majority of them have been changing over to the expanded ones. So anybody know what an LTP is? Or an FTP? Well, my question is to the group, what is that distance measured from? So let's use category A 1.3. Where is the reference point for that 1.3 miles?
Runway threshold,
Runway, which runway?
the runway they intend to land on.
Okay, that's what the LTP is, by the way. It's a landing threshold point. I just found that thing yesterday.
I got a question for you, which
you bet.
is, how do you expect any applicant or any pilot for that matter to be able to estimate a radius to 1/10 of a mile?
All right, I'm getting to that part.
Okay,
Oh boy, believe me, I'm getting to that part. That's what this is all boiling down to is when we're thinking of satting or unsatting somebody, therein lies the problem. By the way, an FTP is a fake threshold point. What that is if the approach does not directly go right down the center line and it goes askew from the center line, the FAA calls that a fake threshold point. It's just off center from the center line, in case anybody's wondering. But
So Phil, is it the threshold of the runway of use, or I always thought it was any point of any runway? Again,
No.
realizing there's no easy way to measure it, but technically,
it's as you look, let me bring this picture up and I'll make it a little bit easier for us here. Okay, so
That's
that's,
fine, I
we've
remember.
all seen that little thing, right? So you'll notice what the R stands for is radius. And you'll notice that each one of those comes off the runway, and it's not necessarily intended to be in line with the runway. The lines are just out there to show you where the reference is coming from. So when you look in the order of how they build these circling approaches, they're a little depiction like this has the letters LTP there at the end of each runway. So when you read the order, which I know everybody doesn't have access to, but because we've had people not understanding, was it the airport reference point? Is it anywhere on the runway? Is it the approach end of the runway? I went and researched this so that at least here we can come up with a fairly consistent answer. It is. LTP is the landing threshold point of the runway you're landing on. So far, so good?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, it's not an airport reference point. The airport reference point could be all kinds of places on an airport, but it is the threshold of the runway that you're intending to land on, not the one you did the approach to. So having said that, let's take an approach that has a 1 mile visibility minimums to do the approach. And we're going to say it is 1 mile. Well, couple problems here. You almost can't even go out the 1.3 miles without losing visual contact with the airport. So before I get to how you measure it, what is it that is the understanding among the group of what you're losing visual of? Is it the runway? Is it the airport? Is it the any part of the airport?
the threshold
Okay,
you're going to cross to land on.
well, the problem is it doesn't say that. It just says if visual is at the visual access, or how's it worded? I just had it over here.
Well, the necessary visual reference requirements.
There
which-
you go. It's
Subpart
lost.
three.
It doesn't address the runway or anything else. It just says visual reference is lost. You'll go ahead and commence your missed approach. But the reason this came up was because, it came up for a couple of reasons. That was one of them. Is the question that was just asked is, what reference are we using to determine that we did not exceed 1.3 or 1.5. And ladies and gentlemen, there's no answer to that. I can't think of an answer to that unless you're that good that you can build the lat long of that landing runway and create a user waypoint for it. That's and put it in your flight plan and look at the distance from it.
I have one I can throw out there for you, Phil.
Sure.
When there's a single runway, or at least there's not a crossing runway, and Casa Grande's a good example of this, keeping the RW05 waypoint in there. It's true that that's the runway threshold, but it does give you a pretty good reference point. You could see your distance.
It does if you have that access to that.
Right.
But once again, we have to base this on in general terms. And when the person's being evaluated on that, what answer is going to be appropriate?
I think I know the point you're getting to, which is this is kind of like VFR cloud clearance requirements. Are you 900 feet away from the cloud or 1,000 feet? We just need some common sense here at a certain point.
Well, that is my point with all this, because I got asked by a few people to figure out what is it that you guys are looking for when it comes to the circling approaches. Now, when I did the check rides, I did my knowledge portion of circling approaches in the oral portion. And I just did the skill set in the airplane. I didn't give them a bunch of questions in the airplane while they're trying to circle the airplane. That's not real world. Nobody would be asking them all those questions. I try to keep the actual flying of the airplane with the lower on distractions when I'll find other appropriate times to do that. But does anyone have any other comments on how they would evaluate the distance being correct or inside the restriction?
Well, I would hope that any of us that are doing check rides can look out the window and tell pretty darn close, when we think we're getting to the edge. Now, if you're going to make it unsat, I would probably pull out my ForeFlight and zoom way in and throw my ruler on it, take a screenshot and have some proof that I can show to the instructor when we get to the debrief. But honestly, what I've been seeing is the opposite. I've been seeing people way too close, in my opinion. And well, it's not just my opinion, because the ACS says that they are to do a stabilized approach. And we now have the new airplane flying handbook. We were just talking about this at the other meeting. So I know off the top of my head, it's page 9-6. I think I got that right. Page 9-6 of the new airplane flying handbook now includes the FAA's 7 criteria of what it means to have a stabilized approach. And the skill for the circling approach to landing says that they must conduct a stabilized approach. What I'm seeing is more akin to a power off 180, which I don't think is very smart in a low visibility, low ceiling scenario.
Well, that part of the problem is that unless you're using the simulator, you can't give them a real, 1 mile visibility visual scenario where they can see what that actually is. But once again, the issue is that, well, you need at least a mile to be able to do the approach, and hopefully you can keep the runway in sight. If you did go out to 1.3, which if you're of that caliber that you do have a way to determine that, you could possibly lose the airport. So you're exceeding the limitations on the visual approach anyway. So the point of all this is that we try to keep the circling approach. There's the understanding oral portion of it, and then there's a skill set, and the skill set is self-explanatory. We're not looking for 45-degree bank angles, on base turn to final. We're looking for basically the same type of turns that we're doing in normal approaches. And then the other issue is that for the missed approach, that tends to be a pretty good can of worms too, is depending on which runway you're landing on, which airport, which way you're going to turn. You've got to basically look at each airport individually and determine how your missed approach would go, instead of the general knowledge is that you're going to turn towards the airport and continue the turn until you intercept the missed approach course.
You're talking about going missed during the circle?
Yes.
Like you lose. Okay,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I've always been happy with that. That's exactly what the book says. It says continue turning towards the airport. And it doesn't say left or right. It says continue turning towards the airport, whichever way you're turning, until intercepting the missed approach course and proceeding on the missed approach course. And I'm happy with that one. That's without getting into all kinds of, well, when you look at the order, it's 8260, if anybody cares, 8260.3 is the order on how they build these circling approaches and what they're anticipate or what they projected for the pilots to do. That gets a little deep, but they've got all these formulas and stuff. But anyway, when it comes to the minimum or the expanded circling, let's see if I can find it here. Nope, that's not it. So there's NBAA put in a request for this right here. 12 years ago. They asked the FAA if they could do this. I think this is a good idea, except for one problem. Okay, obviously you'd have to know they're putting the numbers in there that should be appropriate to the elevation of the airport. That was the intent, was to put whatever numbers in there would be for a 7,000 foot pattern out there. Okay, but it hasn't happened so far, but that's what the NBAA was going. That would have been great to put those things right there. Now I've had people who wrote it down on their plate. They simply wrote 1.3 or 1.5. So there you have it. Any questions on that?
I don't have any questions, but I have a comment on the circling, not necessarily about the distance, but I just find it interesting. It's probably 50-50. 50% of the applicants aren't being taught when they can go below the MDA during a circle procedure. So like the example we just had up, that MDA is 1,300 feet above the ground. So that's higher than a standard pattern altitude.
Yes, it is.
And so you need to get the heck down. And if you don't, you're going to be high, and that's going to lead to problems on the approach.
Well,
But the majority of MDAs that we see for circling are, sometimes 400, 500, 600 feet. Even at Casa Grande is, relatively low. And so if an applicant were to break out of the clouds and then immediately go below the MDA, that's an unsat. They're not in position to land like it says in the regulation. So that, to me, like I said, I'm sure, I don't know if anybody else sees that or tries to make sure that the applicants understand that, but I think that it should be emphasized much more on instrument practicals.
well, it should be. I agree with you. So some of the tests that are given, the examiner's pulling out the Aspen approach chart. And once again, I said that our private pilot commercial check rides are commercial and private 101. We got to remember that this is instrument 101 as well. This is their first exposure to this. And anybody that is going to go into Aspen is going to, normally that's considered a special airport, is going to have special training for that anyway. So, and that's not something they're going to remember from whenever they took their check ride, but that right there, and Jim and I were talking about this, I think it was you, Jim, we're talking about this yesterday, where you break out at the MDA is quite a bit higher than the traffic pattern. Did we talk about that yesterday, Jim?
I don't think that one.
No, that was taught. That was taught. But once again, we've had, unfortunately, some evaluators that considered if you left the MDA prior to when you were actually setting up for the runway, base lay or whatever, that was not considered satisfactory. But I agree with you, Wesley, that some of these things, you've got to come down once you break out. Your VFR, these places like Aspen and stuff, those conditions are actually VFR, but the only way you can get to that airport, if there is any weather, is to do an approach. You basically can't fly into the place VFR.
Well, and the answer to when to descend comes back to the definition of stabilized approach, because one of the criteria of stabilized approach is the consistent and appropriate descent rate. So if they start down at the right place and they go down at the right speed, then they're going to end up stabilized.
Well, that's the key word, Jim, is the right place. The regulation says position.
Yeah.
Because when I ask them, I say, well, when can you go below the MDA? They like to say, oh, well, you know, the airport environment, blah, blah, blah. And then they say, when I can make a, you know, stabilized approach, normal landing, normal maneuvers, which is right, but they're forgetting the most important part. And that's that they have to be in a position to do it.
Mhm.
Because then you know, later in the debrief, what I'll say is you can do a normal stabilized descent right into a mountain. You can do a stabilized descent right into an antenna. If you're not in the right position, so in other words, beyond a VDP or during a circle approach, you have to be in the right position, then the stabilized approach is irrelevant. You have to be in position.
Right.
To do it.
Well, I would say it's irrelevant. They're connected. I mean, if you start down early and have to level off, clearly you weren't in the right position to start down.
Well, yeah, but if you start a stabilized descent into an antenna, then it is irrelevant. You have to be in position.
Well, right, but
They are connected. You're right.
yeah, but if you're in the protected airspace, which is up on the screen right now, you're not going to hit an antenna. If you start down on, you know, somewhere downwind to base at, you know, for our airplanes about 500 feet per minute, then you're guaranteed to not hit an antenna.
Yeah, but if you're 400 feet, and you break out, and you've still got to do a downwind and a base, you know, and you're not on the base leg, why are you descending if you're only 400 feet above the ground?
I haven't seen people descending early, none that I can remember, but I have seen a few where they're on that really tight downwind and they've apparently been told or taught, thou shalt not go below minimums until you're on base.
Well,
And
depending, I guess.
they end up high.
Yeah.
And they, you know, maybe barely stabilized to pass their check ride, but we sure talk about it in the debrief. Or I think I've had at least one unsat because they just weren't able to be stabilized.
Right. And
It
see,
can go either way.
that being taught, that's probably old school stuff. I can't remember because it was so much longer ago for me when I was doing these things, the training of them. But our problem is in the training and evaluating part is that we tend to get off the beaten path of what does the book actually say. It doesn't say anything about base leg. It says when in a position to land from a normal stabilized approach. And unfortunately, we're still teaching a lot of rote stuff where I'm not going to descend until I am on base leg, period. That's what I'm going to do. And that's why that happens. Because when they're teaching these things, there's not a lot of references to the AIM or the Instrument Flying Handbook. When it comes to these, I've asked them what, and this is a valid question, I think, is what is your clearance, obstacle clearance when you're doing a circling approach? How much clearance do you have from any obstruction in that circling approach area? Some of them know it's 300 feet, a lot of them don't. And when I say, you know, it's only 300 feet, that's not a lot of feet. So we have to be pretty careful, you know, when we start doing this stuff. But it'd be nice for them to know that they're pretty minimal on obstacle clearance. They don't have that nice 1,000 feet like they think they do in some of those other situations. But I think one thing that would help for those of us on here that are DPs and any instructors is to spend a little bit more time on, mostly for the instructors, to spend a little bit more time on what the book actually says, not what the company or school's policy is, but what the book actually says. While they may want to teach it a certain way, the reality is we have to evaluate based on what the FAA says. If they're waiting till base leg and end up high, it becomes an unsat if they go unstable. And that's what we have to go with. Even though we know that they were staying there because that's probably what they were told to do. Okay. Any other comments regarding this? So the other thing that I will query them on, or want the instructors to get across to themselves, is here's the pictures out of the Instrument Flying Handbook. The one that's not on here is the one that we probably are using quite a bit at, we could use it at Coolidge as well, but Casa Grande, where there's still some individuals that don't understand the circling approach. You can circle if you're doing a VOR to 5, you can circle to runway 5. You simply fly over the airport, make your left downwind, turn back around, and it's you wouldn't normally do that at a towered airport, but the AIM states that at non-towered airports, before you determine the runway of landing, it might be a good idea to overfly the airport, check the windsock, and then make your decision. In our case, to land 5 or 2-3. So just some more things that I don't think are really taught, that you can actually go right over the top of the airport on runway, approach to runway 5 to circling minimums, and go ahead and make your, if you use that second picture there, Bravo, make your left turn, go downwind, and then go ahead and land on runway 5.
Phil, I actually use that scenario all the time, and a lot of times I'll bring it up on the ground when we're talking about the knowledge and risk management parts of circling. And it doesn't even have to be to fly over and take a look at the windsock, just to, have a cloud bank that's a half a mile, they break out a half a mile from the missed approach point. You're basically halfway between the VDP and the runway at that point. You're still at 1,800 feet MSL. There's no way to do a straight in landing on 5. So the scenario is, hey, the pilot in front of you told you, oh, I broke out just a half a mile away before I went miss. So now that cloud bank's there. Now to go to circling altitude, and you know what to expect. And that's kind of the scenario we use when we get down there. And sure enough, there's someone doing touch and goes on 5. So we're not going to go drilling into 2-3.
Exactly. I remember 16, 17 years ago when I first started doing that around here. And I would say on the radio, this is Cessna 123. VOR runway 5, circle 5, and somebody would come on and say, you mean circle 2-3? I said, no, I'm going to circle the 5, because apparently a lot of the exams that were being done down there were not utilizing that feature. And boy, believe me, if you can to stay with the traffic, it's obviously a whole lot better, winds permitting, things like that. So got another one here. Any more comments on that part right there? Well, let's see here. Whoops, I need to go back. Where is it here? Okay. So what constitutes a circling approach being developed for an airport? Well, unfortunately, I didn't put the answers one at a time. They all came up at the same time. It does not necessarily have to be a circle to the runway, to another runway. If the descent gradient is greater than 400 feet per nautical mile from the FA to the threshold, this gradient is exceeded, the circling only approach procedure may be designed. So Jim, there we go. With if you happen to have a straight in to runway 5 at Casa Grande that required, a more than 400 feet per nautical mile descent rate, that would be your situation where you would go over the airport, go ahead and make your circle and lose the rest of the altitude and end up with a stabilized approach. And this question I used to ask also was, can you do, if you're doing a VORA approach or VOR Charlie approach to the airport, can you land straight in? Or do you always have to circle? So look at the third bullet point there.
Well, are we talking about a straight in landing or a straight in approach?
Well, it's straight in landing.
Two different things.
So straight this does not preclude a straight in landing if a normal descent and landing can be made in accordance with the CFRs and of course our stabilized approach. A question was brought up because someone unfortunately had a situation where they did land straight in. I can't remember, it wasn't down in this area, but I can't remember what part of Arizona it was on a check ride in, I think somewhere up there near Prescott. And the individual landed straight in and unfortunately was unsatted because the examiner thought that he should have circled. But, here you have it right there. You can land straight in. So, any questions on that?
Is it true that approach like VOR Alpha at Scottsdale technically is a circle to land, whether they're on 3 or 2-1, or can we only count that for the check ride if they're on 2-1?
I don't remember. I don't know. Anybody else answer that one?
I thought I looked it up once and it said something, I don't remember where the guidance was, but as long as you had a base to final, it was a circling approach. But I'm going by some.
Doesn't it say it has to be
memory.
more than 90 degrees?
Is that what it is? 90-degree
Yeah.
turn? That would be maybe what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that does sound familiar, but I haven't looked that one up in quite a while. Okay. check this chat
So I
out.
guess as long as they turn left a little bit before they make the 90-degree turn to final on 3, they're okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we just got 91,175 sent to us there by, oh yeah, from Bobby. Okay.
That's actually not Bobby, that's Bob, Captain Bob.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Thank you, Captain Bob.
Yeah.
Just, he's like Madonna, it's just Bob.
Well, it's interesting that you guys just talked about stabilized approaches, because as you see, that's my next slide here. I apologize for the how busy it is. I was going to attempt to paraphrase a lot of this stuff, but you did me a favor there, Jim. You said it's on page 9-7 of the, is it the Airplane Flying Handbook?
Yeah, we just got a new airplane flying handbook recently. It's available on the FAA's website. 9-6. Bottom of page 9-6 is the 7 criteria from the FAA.
Okay, so I want to see if these match. This is, by the way, AC 6198, which is not well known to a lot of people, especially the instructors. This is your IPC criteria, your flight review criteria, and the concept of the stabilized approach. This came out many years ago, but it's an excellent document for references for both students and the instructors. And if you would, Jim, you have that in front of you, their version of the stabilized approaches.
Yeah, I actually already compared the two because thanks to you, I had the advisor circular reference in my personal check ride notes that I share with people. And I wanted to see how closely they matched it. And as far as I can tell, they basically copied and pasted, except they went from 500 to 300 feet, which I was happy to see because I think this was originally written by somebody burning Jet A, because I mean, you're going to be a 300 feet for every mile you are from the runway on a 3-degree glide path. 500 feet's way too high to say that you're going to be fully configured in a 172 or a Piper Archer or any other kind of small piston airplane. So 300 feet at least is doable. And that's what's in the new airplane flying handbook.
Okay, well, let's go back though to the first altitude. So what's that say up there? The airplane should be stabilized by 1,000 feet above airport elevation in instrument meteorological conditions. So that 300 shouldn't be a factor when we're talking about approaches. Correct?
I agree.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure that we're clarifying that. So where does this come into play? Since we do a lot of instrument check rides, both in singles and twins, what do we see when the person breaks out at the DA in a 172? What do we see the pilots do? They're going to land.
And they put full flaps.
Yep.
They unstabilize their beautiful stabilized approach.
Yep. Thank you. Is that what we really want to see? Do we want to try to encourage? There's no reason to go flaps full 30 or 40 on a 172 that's landing on a runway. By the way, I think the minimum length for a runway for a instrument approach is, I think it's just under 4,000 feet. They have an instrument approach to it. I think the lowest I've seen is like 3,800 feet on an RNAV approach or something like that. But obviously there's enough runway for them to land on. So what do we want to consider on evaluating this and possibly getting information back to the schools on that not being such a good idea?
Well, this is a tough one, Phil. First of all, let me correct myself. Now that I'm looking at the new airplane flying handbook, they actually do say 1,000 IMC, 500 VMC, and then the 300 reference that I mentioned is that a go around should be initiated if the approach becomes unstabilized below 300 AGL. So they're still using some pretty big numbers there.
That's the same as this one.
Yeah. So anyway, this is tough because coming from the airline world, we are, and a lot of these guys are heading that way, guys and gals. Of course, we're fully configured at VREF, crossing the final approach point. And we don't change anything after that. So, call it a 5-6 mile final, and it's just not feasible to fly a 172 or a Piper Archer or any other single engine piston the same way. Meaning we don't expect them to be full flaps 65 knots all the way from Geltz or all the way from Roxy.
Well, I agree with you there. I agree with you there because most of them are using flaps 10 and 90 knots. And I've been asking this for 17 years and I've never gotten an answer. Why are they flying a 172 at 90 knots on instrument approaches? Maybe someday somebody can give me an answer for that. But, you know, the approach speed is 65. And obviously you're going to tack on a little bit for weather, whatever like that. But when I had my school, we used 80. That was the fastest we went because you're slowing from 90 to basically below 60 for the airplane to touch down. You have to lose 30 knots in that last couple hundred feet. So I don't know where you going, Jim, with, I agree that we don't want to be configured, but why is flaps 10 with a gear welded down? Why do we feel the need to put more flaps in? Are we not configured for landing at flaps 10?
And just land with flaps 10 is what you're
Yes.
saying.
Yes,
Don't destabilize the approach by dropping flaps.
that was the whole point behind this that came up with some people because there are some thought processes among our group and of course the instructors that if the individual did not put the flaps all the way down, it was not considered a correct landing. So we
But
don't
if they hold that 90 knots on a precision on an ILS, if they hold that 90 knots to 200 feet height above touchdown, even going power to idle and leaving flaps 10, I don't think they're going to be able to slow it down.
That's my point. So that's one of the two things is why are they doing it at 90 knots to begin with? And of course, technically as you read the profiles there, you start slowing once you break out, you start slowing the last couple hundred feet to get that airplane down. Now, if they're just using the flaps to slow the airplane down, I'm not so sure that's a good idea either. Do we really need, we have enough runway to land the airplane, right? We're not doing short field landings on instrument approaches. We're not
True, but they are still supposed to land in the touchdown zone.
That's very good. So how big is the touchdown zone?
Should be big enough.
Can anybody answer that? How long a touchdown zone is?
First third of the runway.
Say again?
First third of the runway.
That's one answer. Anybody else got one?
3,000.
Who said that? Wesley, attaboy. Yeah,
Surprised?
yeah, you got it. It's
Okay.
3,000 or, there's an or after that. So it take a place like Orange County that's only 5,700 feet long. Their touchdown zone isn't 3,000 feet long. It's only half of 5,900 feet. So it's 3,000 feet or half the distance of the runway, whichever is shorter. That's what it actually is. So, and if you look at the paint on the Orange County runway a long time ago, they actually did have a 3,000 foot touchdown zone. When you look at the white stripe markings, they scuffed them out. But so what I'm getting at there along what you're talking about, Jim, is they only have to land in the first 3,000 feet, right? They should be able to do that. That's the other thing is we want to make sure that the examiners as well as the instructors understand, and they do not have to land on a 1,000-foot marker. They do not have to land there. That's an aim point. Okay, if they land 2,000 feet down the runway, 2,500 feet down the runway, that should not be an unsat. They landed in the touchdown zone. We lost sight of that in some of the evaluations. Okay.
Well, I don't know that I really have a point so far on this other than that there's no easy answer. But, normally on this kind of thing, I'd say, hey, it's technique. We shouldn't be dictating to the flight schools and flight instructors how they teach this stuff. As long as it fits us, our job is to, pass them or fail them per that criteria. That being said, we know from all recent year accident report statistics, unstabilized approaches are still one of the leading causes of accidents. And we do have a responsibility as DPEs to pay attention to the accident trends and to have these kinds of discussions about the stuff that's really hurting people. So I don't know, maybe it is time to to push harder on this. I mean, I asked the same question when I did my instrument training back in 1994. It's like, why are we screaming in all the way to 200 feet, in minimums, just to yank the power and drop the flaps? And even, back then we didn't talk about stabilized approaches, but it sure didn't feel right.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, what bringing in those flaps does, it of course, the airplane's going to balloon. So now you had yourself set up, you're on a glide path, but once you get inside the DA or the MDA, you're doing what you need to do to land, on the runway. So you met the criteria of at or above the glide path to the DA or the MDA per the ACS. But when you do that, the airplane's ballooning, now you're pushing forward and you're looking over at the flap handle, I'm sure. So we're doing all these things right within 100 feet of the runway. And I don't see any reason why we can't start in the GA world explaining that that's not such a good idea. And of course, it's not about going to the schools and telling them how to teach. It's about showing them 6198 or showing them, chapter 9, page 6, is that this is what the FAA is wanting people to do, is to get stable. And you have a good opportunity right now to start with it right now. Plus, that'll alleviate a lot of problems right there at that roundout at the bottom of these approaches that we see.
Well, if we take the FAA at face value, what we're proposing here is that we're going to be fully configured and at VREF at the final approach fix, or by 1,000 feet in IMC or simulated IMC.
Well, let's see here.
Do we really want to go that far?
No, look, it's here. Let's see.
I call it VREF. I mean,
yeah, hang on a second. Let me, most smaller planes maintain a speed well in excess of 1 point on instrument approach. Pilot's discretion, okay? An airplane with a VSO of 50 knots has a normal approach speed of 65. However, the same airplane may maintain 90 knots, 1.8, while on the final segment of an instrument approach. Pilots generally select an approach speed for the prevailing weather, air traffic, blah, blah. However, aircraft are usually slowed to a normal landing speed when on final approach just prior to landing. So if we look up here, the target airspeed is, looking up at the top up there, the pilot maintains a constant target airspeed within +10, -5 knots indicated, but it doesn't say his target speed, we'll call it 80. If he's at 80 +10, -5 configured, he met the stabilized criteria. It does not say anything about VSO up there in 2.1.4.3. See that?
yeah, I was just checking while you're reading that. I don't see that they put that in the airplane flying handbook for whatever that's worth.
Okay, all right. But once again, it's telling you to maintain a constant target airspeed of +10, -5. So you pick that speed. If it's going to be 80, +10, -5 is what it is. If it's going to be 90, +10, -5. But if you're using 90 in some of those airplanes, you're going to exceed, in your at flaps 10, you're going to exceed the flap speed, depending on what kind of aircraft you're in. So anyway, that's what I wanted to bring up there, was the information on stabilized approaches. And maybe we have an opportunity to, I know most of the people I've asked about this particular advisory circular or the definition of the stabilized approach never really knew what the answer was. They just knew what their school or their instructor said was a stabilized approach. But you get in the Seminole situation or the twin situation, and for some reason, as they break out, you're on one engine and then they're yanking in the rest of the flaps. So I'm not so sure it's a good idea to be doing that. You don't have to. The FAA is recommending not to do that. So that's one of the concerns I've always had when I see our applicants starting to reach down there, look down there and yank in flaps as they're trying to, finish off the single engine approach. Because the reality is, I know we don't practice single engine go-arounds, and theory is that most of those airplanes won't do them. If we're flying in January, a Seminole will go around one engine, but it won't in August. So do we really need to put in the flaps 25, or some people still put in 40 with one engine, just in case you need to go around? You did definitely committed yourself once that last notch of flaps went in. Any other comments on that? Nothing? Okay.
Oh, Bobby, you're being too quiet. You got to have an opinion on this.
Oh, I have an opinion. I'm just sitting here listening, you know. He-
Well, what's your opinion?
I like the concept of not making a bunch of changes close to the ground. It's fluid at 90, 300 feet. You look up, make visual reference at decision altitude, and you can start stabilizing the airplane towards a safe touchdown. I don't want people forcing the airplane on the ground. It needs to be done when it's done. You have a landing zone for a reason. It's, in my opinion, is to dissipate energy from a stabilized approach into a stabilized landing.
Mhm. Thanks. Well, there's your thing down there at the bottom, Jim, about the 300 feet. So the approach becomes unstabilized, but throw 300 feet AGL. Pilots should initiate immediate go around. Along these lines, I don't know how many of the instructors / schools teach this, because the majority of the people that I've done instrument work with didn't understand, you know, on a plate where it says VGSI and glide slope not coincident. I'm sure everybody on here, the DPE group, knows what that means. What happens is, and I actually heard an applicant get debriefed on this. It was incorrect, but the applicant landed with 3 reds and 1 white on the VASI on an ILS, I think it's at Gateway. And he was debriefed on the fact that he got below the glide path. No, he did not get below the glide path. Another thing for those of you out there listening in on this, hopefully that would be listening in on the, when we put the YouTube link out there too, is that go through that with your students and let them know that when they break out to DA and they see 3 reds and a white, that's okay. And not to pitch up, because that's the other part of the unstable approach. So I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure a lot of us on here have seen that, where they break out and they see 3 reds and a white and they want to pitch up and get 2 and 2. And that's not what that means. It simply means that the glide path and the VASI and the electronic glide path don't match. And there's a reason they're telling you that, is so that when you do break out, you don't get all bent out of shape because you got 3 reds and a white, and nor should the examiner / instructor.
If you've got a 4 light PAPI, if you've got 1 light a different color, you're in the funnel. You might be slightly higher, slightly low, but you're in the funnel.
Yeah.
Well, Phil, I think this was a good discussion. I think that last paragraph we can use to kind of summarize the challenge, which is at the beginning of this stabilized definition, the FAA very clearly sees that to be stabilized means you're configured for landing. Whether you choose, in the planes we're talking about, flap 0, flaps 10, full flaps, whatever the pilot chooses, by definition, you're only stabilized if you're configured for landing, along with the other 6 criteria. And right there in that last sentence, it says, if you become unstabilized within 300 feet AGL, the pilot should initiate an immediate go around. But what are we seeing on instrument flights? They're purposely destabilizing well within 300 feet AGL.
Right.
So there's the disconnect that kind of summarizes everything we just talked about.
It is. And I know this isn't going to happen overnight, because we're talking about huge changes to what the schools or the instructors' concept was of the landing out of an instrument approach. But it'll take a while, but hopefully, and now that they put it in, because it didn't used to be in the AFH. So I'm glad to hear that they put it in there. I haven't looked at the new one yet, but this has been out there for years. And the other benefit of this is that it gives you good guidance on the the IPC and the flight reviews, what they're really looking for. It's a really good guide for that. But yeah, I've been wanting to put this in there for a while, and I had some individuals calling about what exactly are we looking for, when these people break out of these approaches, because a lot of us did fly airline type stuff or corporate jets type stuff where we don't touch that. Once we get past the final approach fix or 1,000 feet, we don't touch anything else. The other part that's in here is that the checklist, briefings and checklists, the accept a landing checklist should be completed prior to initiating the approach. And then, you know, I see some of them teach to do the landing checklist at the final approach. I don't know that that's a good idea. You got some things to look at there. Am I at the right altitude? You know, am I verifying? We used to call it a FAVA, final approach verification altitude. And I know it's not usually taught in a GA environment, but that's your last chance to check any of your equipment to see if the altitude jives with the geographical position on the approach, right? That's your last shot at it. So I'm not so sure. We always taught at the school to have all that done prior to the FAF. Landing checklist was completed prior to that. Okay. Any other comments, questions, input? Okay. Did I do this last time, Jim? This was that looking.
Yeah, you did. Basically,
Okay.
we know the FAA disagrees with themselves all the time, but this was the only reference we were able to find to say that the FAA says it's okay to say looking when we're told, you know,
Right.
traffic, such and such.
Yeah, that's not in their books, but this came from the FAA. So there you have it. Okay, let me see. Jared's not here, but I do have a note from him here regarding some stuff at Chandler. I'm sure you all heard of the accident there, and because of that, let me pull it up here. At Chandler, I guess there are no more short approaches for now that are going to be, let's see here, they will not approve any fixed wing short approaches whenever helicopters in the pattern. So I saw that coming. That's the only thing that he had from his neck of the woods. His other comment was he's seeing some students from a particular flight school. He didn't say which one. They're being taught to raise the flaps before they start applying the brakes. On the, I'm sorry. For the POH states braking first and then raise the flap. So his concern was that a lot of these people are worrying about the flaps and not the brakes, kind of out of
So
order.
you're talking about a short field landing?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have said that. The short field approach.
So the pendulum has swung too far the other way.
Yeah, whatever, you know. But, you know, the problem is that nobody really understands weight on wheels, okay? And braking action. Obviously, as you get into more and more advanced airplanes, that becomes a huge factor for you, right? We don't raise the flaps on airliners because as soon as we touch down, every single ground spoiler on that wing comes up and puts the weight on wheels. So that thing is definitely not producing that much more lift. But I think that's part of the problem and the concept of why are we doing what we're doing on a short field landing? They're just rudely doing it and not understanding the concept. And it doesn't have to be such a quick wham bam thing either, or they're trying to do this in a nanosecond. And that's part of the problem. Make sure you're actually on the ground and maintaining directional control, and then we can go ahead and worry about braking and flaps. And I think that would eliminate a lot of that issue right there. Okay, Kim's not here. Bill is not here. I didn't have, Jim, did you have anything from your neck of the woods?
Nothing specific for Deer Valley other than west wind continues to slowly wind down as they get ready to start their first class out at Goodyear in December. So things, and I did a couple tower tours last month, and the towers definitely seen the decrease in traffic. They're sad to see west wind go, as we are.
Right. Let's see. Todd didn't really have much in the way of information from Prescott, except for that commercial pilot privileges anomaly that was showing up on the orals where the answers given were not in concert with what the examiner thought was appropriate. That's all he had to say. And then let's see, Brian, I think, is on an airplane or something watching this.
Yeah, he left a comment in the chat at the very beginning saying he had to leave after about 20 minutes because he's been traveling. He hasn't been at Falcon in over a month, but is not aware of anything specific.
Yeah. Okay. We've had enough of cards there. So any issues and problems that anybody wants to discuss that we haven't talked about here today? Okay, anything from a procedural standpoint? Okay, anything technical? How about at your meeting, Jim, was there anything that we need to throw in here today from yours?
You know, it was a good meeting. Let me glance at the agenda. Sorry, I wasn't thinking that way. We did record it, so I would just encourage everyone to go back and watch that. There's a new safety video for Marana. We got updates on some of the ongoing projects. Bob, who's on this call, is doing a CFIT seminar on November 22nd. Bob, if you want to, hey, there you go. He's quick. In the chat is the link for that.
Okay,
And yeah, I think those are the highlights. We'll have the whole meeting up on YouTube by tonight.
okay. Let me look at one thing here. Hold on. Trying to get my list of there we go. Okay, participants. Let me see. Craig, you're not on, are you?
I saw him earlier.
Yes, I am.
There he is. Okay. Did you have anything to add from the FSDO side of it?
No, not really. I got on late. I had a hard time logging on. I'm sure I was doing something.
That's my fault. Well, if you probably didn't miss anything because it took me 10 or 15 minutes to get it corrected. So
Just to ask, did any of the DPEs have any questions about the email I sent yesterday? If so, ask them now, but I think it should have been pretty clear.
Well, I just hope Jeff's okay.
Tina talked to him last night. She said he sounded real good.
Good. You know,
okay.
life happens, man. I tell you, it's can be rough.
Yeah. Ernie, anything from you?
Yeah, last time I was on here, you asked me about tachometers.
Yes.
And if you see a tachometer and it says off by 50 RPM, is that acceptable? Actually, if you see that placard, you may want to ask them where they're getting their data from. Most tachometers are only calibrated when they're overhauled or originally built. And when they're built to a specification, and that specification may not necessarily be a TSO, it might be SAE, because that's what the TSO says. So it will say what the allowable plus or minus percentage is. So if it doesn't exceed that, there's no reason to put a placard on it. If they put a placard on it because it exceeds whatever that limitation is, then they need to be able to tell you where they got the authority to put that on.
Okay.
And if they don't have something approved, then it's no good.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay.
Let's see. Anything else, Ernie?
That's the last maintenance thing that came up. So I haven't looked into any lately.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Anybody have any input in best practices? Any feedback from the schools or instructors? We know there's no mentoring going on right now. Any questions now from DPs regarding anything at all? Okay. No committee reports. There's nothing from admin, communication, or membership. Let's see. Oh, Craig, anything from FAST? I think you mentioned yesterday you didn't have anything that you could think of. Is that still the case today?
Yeah, yes.
The only other thing one thing about FAST is that we have rep training going on tomorrow evening. And we'll be doing another annual rep training on Monday afternoon.
That's right.
Go look for those on spans. If you're a rep and you need training, go sign up for those on spans.
Got it. Okay. Let's see, we covered AFTW as well. So there are no programs that I'm aware of that concern us. Any comments from DPEs? Any comments from our FSDO representatives? Kind of already did that. Guests, any of the guests on board, do you have any comments or questions?
Yeah, I have a comment, quick, if I
Okay.
could. The webinar I'm doing on the 22nd is all about getting people involved in making aeronautical decisions and flight planning. And I would like to see, I personally would like to see a lot more emphasis in that direction when it comes to webinars. We are getting into winter, presumably there'll be more webinars than less. And I think it's a really good way to keep the wheels of people's minds turning, especially those that are not flying as often as they would like. And an ideal way to do that is to simply plan a cross-country trip between 2 points that might be common to the audience. And it doesn't have to be too far away, something 100 miles away, 150 miles away, something like that, that involves a variety of airspace, terrain, facility considerations, things that are all pieces of the puzzle when it comes to putting together a flight plan of action. And rather than simply just lecture to an audience, put something together that forces them to make decisions, because we want people walking out to their airplanes with a good, solid flight plan of action, instead of just hopping into an airplane like they're getting into their cars. Thank you.
Oh, no, that's a great idea. And you just jogged my memory on something. I keep forgetting to do this. I've got to remember to make a slide for it one of these days. But because I do primarily CFI training, I'm getting these individuals that have already had 3 or 4 check rides. There's still an issue, misunderstanding with what the difference is between filing a flight plan and opening it and closing it versus flight following. And we've got to get through to everybody. Flight following will not look for you. If you disappear off the scope, you disappeared off the scope. That's all there is to it. They're not responsible, nor do they know, probably don't even know where you might be headed, maybe in the general direction. But I noticed that a lot of the applicants I work with have never opened or closed a flight plan and simply stated, I just use flight following. So we need to make sure that our customers, instructors, and applicants understand that it's in the ACS, it's in there, it's supposed to be tested, and they understand that there's a reason for that. And that is that flight following, if you get lost off the scope, they don't go out of their way to go looking for you. They make a few phone calls, not phone calls, radio calls, and that's it. They're done with you, because they don't know why you did that. Maybe you landed somewhere, maybe you did have a problem, but they don't know what it was. So I've been meaning to put that out in a slide. I may just make a separate presentation for it and send that out on a link as well. But we need to get that across to everybody, that flight following is not the same as filing, opening and closing a flight plan. It's not even close. So if you're in trouble, there's nobody going to help you. It's just not going to happen unless you were able to get a message off to ATC as you were dealing with your issue. That's about the only thing you can do. But if some reason you get under the radar, off course or whatever, they might notice you go off course. But as we know, in this neck of the woods here, there's plenty of areas around here where they can't see you. I mean, you can fly down to Tucson and be lost with Albuquerque Center. You're not necessarily going to be on their scope all the way down. So I just want to throw that in there. Thanks, Bob, for your comment there, because I agree with that, that a scenario-based training is always going to be the best way to do it, instead of a yes, no, true, false. But building these routes like that, where you got to go around, above a mountain, airspace, weather, all these things is where you actually learn how to deal with the cross country. Not just, I know I got enough gas to get there, so let's go.
Please attend. Thank you. Please attend on the 22nd. You'll see how I do it, which is something that is, I don't see others doing it. And I've done it before with with great response.
Good deal.
Because it's simply not spoon feeding an audience down a one-way street. It's getting them involved in the decision-making process, and people like that.
Sure. And which Bob am I talking to here? Because I don't have a last name on you there.
Yeah, that's me, Kilo Alpha Tango Zulu, and you'll see my name in the spans notice.
Oh, got it.
if you
Okay.
click on that.
Got it. Yeah, because I'm going to put down a list of all the attendees for this too. For this meeting. Okay.
Phil,
Yes.
I
Hello,
put a
Lee.
link- Hi, Phil. Thanks for having the meeting and inviting me. They're always great. I put a link to the Marana Regional new video in the chat, and also a welcome to the ASAG meeting next Wednesday, the 17th.
Got it.
Thank you.
Got it. I see him there. Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you very much. Actually, I'm gonna copy that one right there. Okay. All right. Well, that's it for this year. Whoops. There we go. Thanks again for listening. Thanks for taking the time. Sorry for the bumpy start, but Jim's going to beat me up on that and make sure that never happens again. So next meeting is scheduled for January 11th, 2022. Well, y'all have good holidays, and see you next year.
Thanks, Phil. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Nice work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Was that you grunting, Dave?
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, bonds.